Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very interesting webinar with Bernard Marantelli, the founder and CEO of Colossus Bets. This is in conjunction with the 10th iGaming Forum, which will be taking place in Stockholm on the 17th and 18th of April at Bern's Salonger. Now, this is very, very exciting, or let's say it's a very exciting moment in time for Sweden, because Parliament is voting for re-regulation of the Swedish gambling law in 2018, in a couple of months actually. And on the 1st of January 2019, everyone is expecting Sweden to have a re-regulated gambling and gaming market. Now, what interests me the most about this, at least one of the topics that interests me the most, is what's going to happen to sports totes like horse racing totes, because I'm a big fan of a Saturday pool called B75, which ATG runs. Now, this means you can bet €1, you pick 7 horses, and then in a matter of hours, you have won €1 million. Sweden, of course, also has Stryktipset for the football and so on. And I'm interested in what's going to happen with this going forward when Sweden has re-regulated, and also with the other aspect of the sports totes, horse racing totes, in Europe and worldwide as well. And Bernard, who is going to share his insights with us, he is one of the sharpest minds as far as this is concerned. He was nominated for European Executive of the Year last year by the World Gaming Awards. He is famous for the £10 million Colossus draw, and he is actually involved in sports pools, I think, in 5 different continents. But of course, today we will be very happy if we can focus on Sweden and the Nordics in particular. So without much ado, actually, I will go over to our presenter today, Bernard Marantelli, CEO and founder of Colossus Bets, who will tell us a little bit of what to expect going forward as Sweden re-regulates in 2018 and 2019. Bernard, welcome, and the word is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. I'll just check. Can everyone see my main screen, or are they seeing like a secondary screen with the presentation split in 2?
Everyone can see your main screen, and the contents are on the right. So just go ahead.
Okay, fine. So look, I very briefly, well, firstly, I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me to do this. I think it is a very interesting time in the Nordic region, and particularly in Sweden, as really the largest total pools market in the Scandinavian region. And of course, the Scandinavian region is still and has historically been very dominant for pools betting. So of course, it's very interesting for myself and my company. So I run Colossus Bets, which is in many senses focuses on pools betting for sports. So a little bit like the triptychs, at which I hope I pronounce roughly correctly. It's always an interesting name for me, but and similar to the V75, so like the horse racing. So we focus on multi-leg tote jackpots, and we add cash out and syndicates and features like that. So I was asked to present on totes, how they exist around the world, and what might be some of the future innovations in those totes, because with the re-regulation in Sweden and through the Nordics, there will be an opportunity in many senses to start to modernize and innovate these pools and bring them into line or make them more competitive with some of the other more flexible betting options that exist around the world. And I think in real terms, if you look at the 2 dominant types of betting, they really are totes and fixed odds. And then the domination of that type is generally driven by the prior regulatory regime that they work in, whether it's America, where you're only allowed totes, or whether it's England, where you're allowed fixed odds, they tend to be the areas that dominate. So we'll go through the areas around the world, how they're operating, some of the innovation that is in these markets already. So look, we'll look at the sports pools. So like the triptych set from a Nordic perspective, and look at some of the turnover and jackpots and takeouts, and how you can vary the product and what different features exist around the world. Then we'll quickly run through some of the horse racing options around the world. We'll briefly look at fantasy pools, which are really only dominant in America, and it's a perfect example where the type of bet is driven by the legislation. Fantasy pools seem to be able to exist in an American environment that outlawed sports betting, but they managed to get around that through the construction of a pool that didn't involve a single team or a single score and involved an aggregation of players. And then they operated in a gray environment for some time before getting regulated. So there's about a 3 billion handle there in North America that we'll look at. And then we'll quickly look at the Nordic countries. And I don't profess to be an expert in their markets and their market shares, but obviously the products fall very much into my expertise as a individual who's running Colossus Bets, which is a pools betting company, and prior and still now, I'm a professional gambler on a number of tote pools or jackpot pools around the world, and I am a professional gambler on many of the pools that I'll be discussing with you today. So if we look at the sports pools around the world, and I'm going to tend to skip through some of this quickly because it's really data that I want people to have and be aware of, but there's no real point, explaining it in micro detail. So here's a list of the highest turnover pools around the world. So towards the top here, and I've generally converted to GBP. There may be one or two mistakes there where they are actually euro numbers, but if you look in China, they have a 1x2 or a HDA 14 as they call it, 14 football games. They run about 5 of these a week. They do about 400 million turnover a year on this game, and they have a consolation for 13 of 14 you see in the minimum consolation tab. How do they allocate the pool? 70% to 14 out of 14 and 30% to the consolation 13 out of 14. They have a takeout of 35%. Which is similar and in line to the triptych set, which has 35%, and then they have a tax on winnings. So essentially, if you look at this table, top to bottom, I have a list of various pools around the world, which should be reasonably exhaustive. I'll be surprised if there's $100 million annual pool there that is not covered, but of course there are pools in Egypt and Morocco and South Africa, but as you see here, the main two being from China. The HDA 9 is an interesting product, and we'll talk about this product in the innovation section as well, but essentially they give a list of 14 games, and you have to choose 9 of those 14, and you can choose any 9 you want. So it starts to merge a determined number of legs pool with the variability of a fixed odd accumulator. So I can choose games 1 to 9, and the next client might choose games 4 to 14 or 5 to 14. So we're not overlapping on all of our games, we're overlapping on some games, and then there is a single dividend for people who get 9 winners. The Quinella is the Spanish football, which historically had been a HDA or a 1x2 15, and a number of years ago they introduced the 15th leg, which doesn't always occur in the 15th position from a time perspective, but the 15th leg it's not quite a correct score product, but it's a goal prediction leg. The triptych set, and we look at a number of other football lotteries here from Korea, the Lotto Foot from France, a Euros triptych set. And what we do see here what we're seeing emerging in more recent years is a number of 1x2 Toto pools coming out of Russia with 1xBet, FonBet, MarathonBet, etc. So there is a growing set of pools, sports pools coming out of Russia. What tends to be interesting about the sports pools in Russia, and just one quick question, Robert, can everyone see the mouse where I'm sort of pointing to the part of the slide I'm on? All right, I'll move on anyway. Sure. Yeah, what's interesting about the Russian pools is that they have a very deep consolation structure. So they only have a small portion of the pool for the win. So the jackpot grows slowly, and they have a very large portion. In the case of 1x2 and FonBet, 32% of the spend is allocated to getting only 9 out of 15. So very much like lottery, a deep consolation structure, a little bit like a V75 where you get paid for 5 or 6, or Colossus pool where you get paid for 4 out of 6 or 11 out of 15, etc. So this movement towards a deeper consolation structure, which gives more small dividends to more people on a weekly basis, I think is something that you're going to see continue to evolve and become industry standard in pools. If we look very quickly at takeout, generally you're looking at the Russian pools with the deep consolation structures having very low takeouts, around 5 or 10%. And then you're looking at the government monopolies or the government run pools, such as the Propo in Greece, the Quinella in Spain, etc., having quite high takeouts. So generally sort of commercial new entrants are at the lower side, and pure government organizations where the retail client playing these games really doesn't have an opportunity. The takeouts are generally significantly higher. And sorry, I think I said they don't have an opportunity, where the retail player doesn't really have an opportunity to play another alternative international game through getting blocked online or no ease of access or no advertising of that game in the country. So a mixture of access and a mixture of awareness. If we look at just quickly here, this is looking at what sort of jackpot you can expect some of these pools to get up to, because the jackpot in some senses is what drives a person to play a low stake, high payout game. So here we just look at the size of jackpots and how long these sort of jackpots take to get to those sorts of sizes. So if you look at 1x2, or sorry, 1xBet at the moment, it currently, or sorry, last year, sorry, I've lost a slide there. Last year it got up to 3.4 million euros, I think that was, but it took 126 draws to get there. Whereas if you look at the football lottery in China, they tend to have a sort of 1 million base on sort of a new pool. Of course, they turn over 400 million a year. And as soon as it rolls sort of 1 or 2 times, you're already looking at a 5 million type pool. So this is just how long it takes to get to these various jackpots, the larger jackpots that roll over. Right, so I wanted to very quickly look at some of the variation that exists in sports betting pools, and we're still on sports betting pools for the moment, and some of the variation interacts with racing and fantasy pools, but just very quickly here I wanted to show a few examples that exist. So Unilad in conjunction with William Hill run essentially a free play game, and generally free play games are becoming a very important part of the betting landscape at the moment as an acquisition and retention tool. And the free play games are generally run as totes or pools because, of course, it limits the downside of the operator hosting the product. So Unilad and William Hill run what they call Football 21, and they give a list of, I think, 40 football teams on a Saturday, and you have to choose any number of teams that between them will predict and score exactly 21 goals. So let's say a team on average is going to have about, well, so a European football game, if you're not looking at France or Italy, will have a goal expectation around 2.8. That's for a game. That would generally be a home team of about 1.8, 1.9, and away team of about 1. So really, you'd be looking at predicting about 10 to 12 home teams, and you have to get 21 goals. Now, if one gets 3 and one gets 0, that's fine as long as you get to 21. So again, it's a larger data set where you can choose a smaller set of predictions inside it. You know, a small example, and then they're not the only ones. 1 second, I've just been told to close my Skype because it apparently keeps popping up on everyone's screen. So 1 second. All right, you won't see anymore if my wife tells me to bring milk and bread home over Skype. So back to iPools, they're only one example, but they are an example of a smaller pool startup here in the UK that is basically running a whole bunch of pools, some based around fantasy, some based around key stats, some based around the more traditional 1x2 or correct scores, and having a longest lasting or last man standing element to some of them as well, where you have to predict something week after week after week. Blink Pools, again, just one example, Blink Pools, but it's a nice little site that is running what I would call micro pools on esports. So if you look at an esport game where you might have Dota 2, it might run over 5 sets and it might run over half an hour. But Blink Pools would generally run a 40-second pool on who will die next or what will be the main activity over the next second or the next set. And it's a pool that will set up based on gameplay. It will take 20, 30, 50, a few hundred bets from clients within a 10-second window or a 20-second window, and it will settle in 1 or 30 seconds, depending on the outcome of the game. If you look at the Sky Super 6, this is to predict 6 correct scores. It's run by Sky Bet. It's been running about 9 years. It now has 1.7 million weekly unique players and about 7 million annual unique players. And I think this is really the flagship product that led everyone else to say we need some sort of predictor game as a CRM retention and recruitment tool for players into our sportsbook, casino, betting operator, etc. And I think it's an English phenomenon more for the moment, but I think it will spread due to corporate social responsibility, etc. That the affiliate world and the affiliate system is under some pressure, and it's the free play sort of predictor games that I think are going to be very important over the next 5 to 10 years as a replacement for the more traditional affiliate mechanisms of recruiting and retaining players. Of course, we have examples like the classic pools, the football pools, where you have to pick 10 games for score draws out of a list of 49 games or 48 games. So you've got a whole range of pools on this page of examples of pools that exist. We'll get now a little bit more into the technical side of innovation and new pools that exist, and how do they operate and how do they work, and what features do they add to the tote or parimutuel world. And the first example here we have is Longitude. It's a tote company that's largely based in North America. It's a very intellectually curious proposition for me. And basically what it seeks to do is merge all of the pools on a particular event into a single pool. And so not to bore people with technicality, and I'm happy to explain it offline, or Longitude would be happy to explain it to you as well. You essentially go into an environment where, if you look at a football game where you have got home, draw, and away, all of the home outcomes, all of the draw outcomes, and all of the away outcomes can essentially be broken down to a correct score. Home could be 1-0, 2-0, 3-1, 9-0, 9-4, 9-2. Now, of course, the 9 zeros and 4s and 2s are all extreme and will never occur or rarely occur. But essentially what happens if someone bets into the 1x2 market, the match result market, their bet actually in the back end gets fragmented down to a variation of correct scores and spreads part of their stake across all the correct scores. If someone wants to bet on a correct score game or correct score bet, they go into the correct score market. If someone wants to bet on over under 2.5 goals, they get placed on all the correct scores that are under 2.5 goals or all the correct scores that are over 2.5 goals. And what they do is centrally merge all of this liquidity into a base pool, which is the most fragmented or specific pool that exists on the product, and then they net all those positions back up to the parent pools. So Longitude have done that for the Hong Kong Jockey Club, where they have merged the first 4 in any order and the quartet, which is the first 4 in an exact order. And they also ran it for a number of months for the football pools, where they ran a product called Match Extra, which merged the 1x2 into the correct score market and vice versa, and all aggregated back up. What it does is it allows for a handful of illiquid pools to have a bit more strength because the liquidity of all of those pools are merged. My mouse moves quickly. Global Tote is an Australian firm. It's proposing to be a one-stop shop for B2B, and it's essentially suggesting that it's a wholesale tote. So what it's looking at doing in many respects is saying, right, we can have a low margin tote that we will provide or merge liquidity from around the world into a low margin tote. And we can possibly use this as a fixed odds replacement, because I think one of the complaints about totes in world areas where fixed odds dominate is that the margins are higher, especially on small fields, and that if someone wants £200, they are affecting their own tote price if the win market is not liquid. So they're seeking to sort of solve all of those problems in one global wholesale tote. They've been around for a couple of years now, and they're getting some reasonable contracts in Australia at the moment. The third thing that I wanted to just talk about, variation in sort of pool technology, is a firm called BetUp, or BetUp was the retail branded name of it. It was run or owned by ComoLogic, and it was live on Unibet and also the football pools. And it was really short-term tournaments. So you would bet on the 7:30 Champions League game between Real Madrid and Barcelona. And what you would have to do is you would have to bet on outcomes of each 5-minute period. And this is going to be slightly annoying, but let me just quickly go through to here, which will actually show you the example. So here was bet up, and you'd have to say between the 1st and 4th minute, one of these activities was going to happen, a goal or a goal kick or a foul. And basically, as you progress through 9 5-minute periods in the first half and 9 5-minute periods in the second half, you're essentially running a progressive micro pool or a multi-leg pool of 18 time periods. And it wasn't a matter of you had to succeed in each time period to get through, but it was more of a matter of who had the most aggregated points by the end of the 90-minute period. I don't really know what happened to this. I thought it was quite interesting, and it survived a season on Unibet and the football pools, but then the base company closed down, which I think was a bit disappointing for an innovation point of view. So let's move on to horse racing pools very quickly. Again, obviously quite relevant. The V75 stroke ATG hold a fairly dominant position in this table. If you look here, just the major pools around the world for now, these are in, this table I think is in euros or US dollars. There's not a lot of difference between the two. Japan dominant, Hong Kong in second place, America, Australia, France, Korea, Sweden in 2, 4, 6, 7th place. Now, again, most of these places have regulatory restrictions on fixed odds betting. Most of these totes are government or quasi-government, or up until 10 or 20 years ago in places like Australia were essentially government-run products. We have an average takeout here. Average is an interesting thing because in a lot of these places you'll have win takeouts in the low to mid-teens, and you'll have exotic takeouts in the mid-20s to mid-30s. Just looking at the UK very briefly, not to sort of sidetrack that we want to discuss what are the opportunities in the Nordics going forward, but in the UK, the monopoly on tote betting run by Betfair expires in July this year, at which point the market will be open for everyone. I think it's a difficult area to get involved, but 54 racetracks have got together to perform to become a new tote operator, and that tote operator will be running win-place single leg pools with a technical provider called Inida, and they'll be running their multi-leg jackpots with my firm Colossus Bets. In the UK, the current place pot is really the dominant product of the multi-legs. It has about 120 million sterling handle per year, and this is a bet type where you have to pick a horse to place in each leg, not a horse to win each leg, but a horse to place in each leg. So it tends to be a bet type that's semi-easy, and I say semi-easy to win because last week at Cheltenham there was a place pot pool that had 1.2 million entries, and with some very complicated races and very extreme results, of the 1.2 million entries, only 28 people managed to choose a place getter in each race. I just say here that multi-leg pools are tailor-made for cash out opportunities. We'll get to that in the innovation section later. And I think what's important for tote systems is that the dividends need to be competitive with fixed odds. And what tends to happen if you have a fixed takeout in a win market of 15%, that is competitive very much on a 13 to 40 runner race. It's uncompetitive on 12 or less runners, generally in the UK as an example, because fixed odds tend to operate at an over round of around 1.5% per runner. So in the small fields, fixed odds outperform totes, and in the large field, tote dividends outperform fixed odds. And I think that's why some people like Global Tote and other totes are starting to look at low margin or variable margin takeout, which I think is one of the most interesting things that we can do in tote technology, tote pool, parimutuel technology going forward. Just very quickly here, lots of discussion points that I can talk on for hours, and I won't do that with you today. I'll give you a reprieve. But looking at the future of horse racing pools, and this can be sports pools, football pools, fantasy pools also. I think globally commingling, creating large pools is very interesting and important. It is complicated because someone in Sweden or America might not follow the Australian horses or form in that much detail. It's not like Manchester United, which is universally known and universally bet on. Horse racing is generally a little more regional. And, with due respect to ATG and the Swedish people who love betting on trots or harness, most of the world couldn't care about harness racing. Or understand it, or they'll look at it and think, wow, what's that, weird sled behind a horse? So there are some challenges around global commingling of content due to interest levels, but there are some markets that can merge. France, for example, and Australia have reasonably prominent trotting jurisdictions and interest in trotting, so their sort of activity into an ATG type bet could be quite interesting. Variable takeout that we have discussed already. I think bespoke pools, where in a longitude type system or similar type pool and merged liquidity of pools, people can define precise bets. And again, a little bit like the football, they say, here's 30 games, you need to choose 14 of them. I think cash out, which is something that my firm has been the instigator of in betting and pools, I think it's very interesting for a product like the triptych set or the V75. If a client plays that for €2 and after 6 legs, he is 1 horse from winning €1,000,000 or 1 football result from winning €1,000,000, he's completely stuck. He can't do anything. If he was a super sophisticated user, he could possibly go onto an exchange or do a bespoke hedge with a bookmaker. But in real senses, as a retail player, unless there is a cash out opportunity for the retail player on that pool, and provided he watches the race and he gets $1,000,000 or nothing. And while $1,000,000 or nothing is an inspiring, interesting story when he succeeds, it's a tragic story when he fails. So of course the addition of cash out from January 19 in Sweden would be extremely interesting. As we've covered, the use of free-to-play products on racing pools is growing. If you look at TVG, which is a ADW, so a tote operator in North America, they recently ran £1 million $1 million, free-to-play pool on Pegasus night across 8 legs, and allegedly got tens of thousands of entries into that. What's interesting for racing is that they need to take advantage of the unique benefits, that customer accounts are not closed, which a lot of places around the world that is doing fixed odds on sports betting, there's a lot of inside information and unique information, and you can be a very good form student and become a net winner on horse racing bets, because the operators are struggling to price the product correctly. Anyone can essentially price that Man U is 5-4 this weekend, or $2.25 from a decimal perspective. Trying to price a horse in a trotting race in one of the V75 races, or a horse at Ascot or Cheltenham, is very complicated and hard to do. And if you don't do it well, people who do it better will take your money off you. And it's a very difficult part of horse racing pricing, and it's a very difficult part of fixed odds operators, that they're really getting a lot of pressure on their horse racing margins. And it may be that horse racing should, in the fixed odds parts of the world, kind of embrace the risk management of pools. Another thing that I think is interesting is when you look at the big jackpot bets, is to have a syndicate. I think a lot of people here will have been to a race meeting in their life where there is a multi-leg jackpot bet, and when they get there with their friends at the dinner table or the box or whatever they're doing, they all put in £10 and they all go and share a single ticket together. I know ATG already have their syndicate system. Colossus Bets have set up another crowdfunding syndicate system where someone proposes a syndicate, and any client anywhere, without knowing that person personally, can fund that syndicate and take part in that joint venture, and then that plays out over social media or Facebook, etc. And one of the last things we can talk about in detail or offline afterwards is variable or low takeout, to again help compete with fixed odds. Right, we're moving quickly. I'm going to gloss over fantasy because I don't think it's especially relevant for Europe and the Nordics in particular. But very quickly, the two dominant players in North America are DraftKings and FanDuel. They turn over about $3 billion US dollars between them. They have about $2 billion of jackpot guarantees, and they do about another $1 billion of either head-to-head or 3-player tournaments and that sort of thing. As I said, these pools are not allowed to include elements like which team will win or what point spread will occur, all of these things are fantasy around drafting a number of players or looking at the MVP or that sort of thing. So these are all player performance pools. And of course, America, depending on who you listen to, is on the verge of opening up and allowing sports betting, almost certainly in Pennsylvania and New Jersey within the next month or two, following, obviously, without being a lawyer, following the Supreme Court decision. Those two states would already be open in theory because they have put in preemptive legislation that will allow sports betting. I just very quickly here, how do you play them here? You tend to play either you have a salary cap, or you have no salary cap called a pick'em, or you have a showdown where it's one-on-one, or you have something like a snake draft where I choose a player, then you can choose a player, but not the one I do. So you take it in turns to choose players out of a pool. So again, a number of ways that you can bet or play a fantasy product in North America. Now, of course, fantasy products try to gain a foothold here in Europe. You have had Mondo Goal, Ulala, a number of pools trying to operate here. You've, of course, had DraftKings come into parts of Europe and get licensed in parts of Europe and merge to their American pool. And I think they're having some success. That's just what is the breakdown of where people bet. And it really is still driven by NFL. So American football, it only has about 17-week season, but still does the dominant part of their annual handle. And outside of baseball and basketball, hockey, golf, soccer are all relatively a waste of time. I think we can skip this. I think everyone will have these slides later, but just here's some resource if you want to look at where some of those figures come from. Some more resource if you want to look at the regulation of fantasy pools in North America, how they kind of escaped the US loopholes where they're regulated and where they're gray, or where they're black, where they're white, and where they're gray, which obviously a lot of the world from a gambling perspective has sort of shades of clarity. So look, the Nordic countries, and I'm going to feel a bit like a foreigner trying to preach to people who know what's going on in their country very well. So I won't do that, but because for me, it's really about what products around the world exist and what you may see from January 19 going forward in the Nordics, or in Sweden in particular, with regulation or re-regulation or deregulation, whichever prefix you want to put on the word. Svenska Spel, obviously the triptych set is important and dominant from a turnover perspective, around 200 million. And what's going to happen there, and what sort of pressure Svenska Spel are going to see from other entrants into the market, or from other people within Sweden, will be quite interesting, and I'm sure they have their position to defend. They have a centralized pot of liquidity around 200 million euros in the triptych set. So I think that's going to be hard to encroach upon and replace by anybody, but I think they will also have to innovate to make that product more competitive with other opportunities, and use their dominant position of liquidity to maintain their foothold there. I think ATG are going to have a very similar discussion from perhaps a slightly more dominant position of larger turnover, and turnover on, with due respect again to trotting, a globally niche product. So I think people will find it reasonably hard to encroach on this because of the content and the liquidity. But again, the V75 being, let's say, their main headline product, it's very hard to replicate. It's reasonably easy to replicate a win tote pool on race 4 from Savella, or whatever, however you pronounce that trotting track. It's very complicated to produce or reproduce a V75 that a person expects to win 500,000 or 1 million or 2 million if they're correct. And of course, there are people trying to do us. We have our Legolas bet, which in real terms are trying to mirror the products that are offered by ATG, and they're trying to mirror them almost in terms of naming, with a pick 76 and a pick 54, so extremely similar formats. They are trying to put up guarantees that cover the opportunity to win a large prize, instead of having actually the pure liquidity there from day one. But I think in real terms, while these guys are getting some interesting handle, they're finding it quite difficult to really encroach properly on the 500 million of V75 handle and the 1.3 or 4 billion of total handle that ATG relies upon. So very quickly, just looking at the main countries there and what they do. And again, as we said at the beginning, they are all predominantly dominated by quasi-government pools betting across football and trotting. And I think one thing that I think is likely to occur as regulation becomes more free is that you're going to see a lot of merging of liquidity, particularly of football pools. You essentially have a football 12 or 13 or 14 in nearly every country in Europe. It's generally a 1x2. It generally has similar constellations. It's frequently on similar content. Sure, the triptych set will have a bunch of European games, or have a European triptych set and a local one. The Greeks will have a Greek pool and a European pool. But in real terms, a lot of these pools are essentially the European version of the pool should be able to merge. And I think you will see a lot of that happening over the next few years. Very quickly, pools betting innovation that we haven't covered. Look, I think this is really for people to look at in the slide presentation later, or contact me if they want to talk about it. But this was quickly looking at iPools and how it works. And it's kind of a leaderboard type pool. So a few slides there if people want to look at that. How the Unibet Bet Up product worked, the micro pools leg by leg. The Sky Super 6, you just get one free prediction where you just do the scores per leg. And look, what's interesting about the Sky Super 6, they give away $250,000 or $1 million on the weekend. What tends to happen, and this is why it's important to have a pool. Last year, the pool was won twice. Once it was won by 2 players, so they got 125,000 each. And once it was won by 125 players, so they got 2,000 each. And if that was a fixed odds bet, and those 125 people won, Sky could have easily been paying out, 10 million or something like that, which, is large enough that it's a borderline profit warning, or it impacts their quarterly results. So I think the pool element helps manage risk as well, which is another selling point for people who control pools and pool liquidity, and running these sort of free play games as entry points. You can back those free to play games into a cash game and have protection 2 ways there. 1, from the size of the cash game and the liquidity, and 2, from the fact that on the occasion that there is an extreme amount of winners, you have a limited downside. BetVictor ran a free to play retention game that I forgot to explain at the top of the talk, but you basically have to predict who will which player will score a goal and in which minute, and then a correct score, which is the kind of the penalty shootout if 2 people predict the same player at the same time. And I think that's been fairly well received. I just wanted to finish with unsuccessful ventures, and there are a lot of them. And these are essentially pools. So this was Badoogie was an early version of iPools. Run Last Man Run in particular was a survivor type game, and a lot of them couldn't win from a B2C perspective, and couldn't get enough traction from a B2B perspective, which I think is was the ultimate demise of Bet Up with Comma Logic as well. So it's a difficult environment for startups to innovate and get into this space, because they lack the liquidity, they lack the marketing budget or capability to survive in a B2C sense, and they lack the runway to do full B2B integration and work. The B2B operators that have all the clients, the 365s, the ATGs, etc., they don't necessarily want to work with a startup and share that revenue. And even if they do, the technical integration can become quite difficult or not seamless. So there's many ways why the smaller people in the pool space have found it extremely difficult. Look, I think that's the end of the presentation. Hopefully that was interesting, and I think Robert is going to take or receive written questions now, which are going to pop up on my screen or similar.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for a great presentation. This is Robert Ockbo, the editorial director of the iGaming Forum in Stockholm on the 17th and 18th of April. We've just listened to Bernard Marantelli discussing the future of sports pools. Now, everyone is free to ask a question. There is a questions tab. If you are an attendee to this webinar, there is a questions tab on your screen, and you can ask Bernard any question that you want, and I will pass them over to him. But I'm going to start by asking a question myself, because one thing I'm very curious about, Bernard mentioned ATG in this webinar, which is the big state-run horse racing operator, and they have this fantastic pool on Saturdays called V75, which attracts a turnover often of over 100 million crowns. That's over 10 million euro. And in a country of 10 million inhabitants, we actually have like over 1 million V75 coupons being played on Saturdays. Now V75 has become so popular that the ATG is actually doing it on other days than Saturdays as well, once in a while. But my question to Bernard is, a pool that has such a large customer base and that is so established in a country. Now, even if Sweden re-regulates and other operators are free to challenge them, is a pool like the V75 horse racing on Saturdays, can anyone actually realistically challenge a super successful pool like this?
Look, I think it's difficult to challenge the V75 because it's got €500 million of liquidity on an annual basis. So it's got very strong win dividends and very stable and secure consolation dividends. I think the challenge for the V75 isn't really that someone will produce V75 version 2 that is better. I think even if they did something that was better, it would take 5, 10, 15 years to fully erode that brand and that reputation and that product awareness. I think its bigger challenge is that with re-regulation, are there more sexy alternatives? Will people get into larger football jackpots? Is the presence and interest in horse racing kind of globally on the decline and being replaced by football? And I think in many parts of the world it is. Will that replacement of racing by football permeate Sweden? It's an interesting question. So far, for whatever reason, and I'm not an expert on why, but the trotting has managed to hold a dominant position over the Svenska Spel football betting. So I do think in terms of getting a replacement of the V75, I think they will need to innovate to stay relevant and defend their position. But I don't really think a person can produce a competitive trotting pool. I think they need to more look at defending their turnover against other areas of gambling, fixed odds, football betting, sports betting, more so than worrying about a direct competitor in a trotting pool.
All right, we have another question from Denmark. It's quite similar to what I asked actually. The webinar attendee is asking, I can also remind all webinar attendees that you can click on the questions tab and you can ask any question of your choice, and I will forward the question immediately to Bernard Marantelli, or at least as soon as possible. But the question from Denmark is, do you think the re-regulation will make pools like Stryk, Tipset and V75 stronger or weaker, i.e., do you think that after the re-regulation in 2019 and 2020, that the turnover of pools like this will go up or down, or stay the same?
I think the turnover of both the V75 and Triptych should go up, because one of the and it really depends what you do with them. If you allow external liquidity into those pools, you can definitely see growth. If you now, through a more open regulation, are allowed to change the rules or change the features of the pool, if you are allowed to add cash out, if you're allowed to add or promote single winner jackpots, if you can expand the geographical distribution and entry points into large jackpots through sort of globally merging the pools, or selling the pools on a more global basis, I think you can definitely see an increase in liquidity. And I know both of the Svenska Spel and the V75 have had a love-hate relationship with international liquidity. I think they love the international liquidity from a retail perspective. I think they struggle and have a very bipolar interest in the international professional liquidity. But I think between innovation, utilizing their big liquidity point that they hold, the dominant position they hold, and looking at possible retail international distribution, I think they're in a strong position with more liberal regulation to actually grow their liquidities.
All right, and we have a question here from Sweden. This attendee is asking, Legolas Bet, that's based on Malta, that has tried to copy ATG's products. For their first year, they have actually been struggling. The webinar attendee is asking, do you think this is partly because Legolas Bet does not have a presence in Sweden? I think by that, this person means that, for example, ATG sell their V75 at ICA, which is a store, retail store chain like Walmart, and inside the country itself, Legolas Bet, for example, is totally invisible. Do you think this is one of the reasons why a carbon copy company like Legolas Bet are struggling, or is it the sheer size of the pool that ATG is owning right now? That's the game decider completely.
Look, Legolas Bet in some respects is a little bit similar to Colossus Bets. Colossus Bets has come into an existing market of football pools, normally a country-based pool, Triptych, Quinella, French Foot Lotto. And in some senses, although we're not regulated or present in all those territories, we're essentially trying to operate a global merged football pool that we need to get our brand name and our product out there to compete with those other opportunities. So we've tried to compete on guarantee, we've tried to compete on syndicates, we've tried to compete on cash out on a leg-by-leg basis, but we haven't had the 40-year presence that Quinella has had in Spain. Now, granted, that's not a great example because we don't actually accept bets from Spain because it's illegal to accept bets from Spain, but we don't have the presence or the brand recognition of the football pools in the UK. So our 4-year struggle so far as a company to kind of get market share has been very complicated. And without knowing Legolas's financials, they're essentially trying to do the same thing. They are trying to become the new pools provider and largely mimicking or not moving very far from the known and trusted ATG product. Now, of course, they are trying to do it with guarantees rather than true liquidity, which is what Colossus Bets are trying to do as well. So I do think brand recognition is a very slow process. And if you try and do it in a B2C sense, you have to spend millions and millions of pounds to get any sort of brand recognition similar to ATG and the V75. And if you don't have that brand recognition being reinforced on a daily basis because your friends play the V75, or you play the V75 as you walk past your shop on the way home, or you know the brand so you go online, as a new entrant trying to get into that market, it's a slow, expensive process with very many aspects, social awareness and sharing, presence of the product, size of the pool, established brand recognition, and not to suggest that I think that Legolas are a firm that might not pay you. There are a lot of firms in sports betting, etc., that historically have not paid people. Whereas ATG, Svenska Spel, football pools have really that position of trust. When we entered the market with a £10 million prize, people asked, will this firm pay you? Will they pay you the guarantee? So there are so many barriers for a new entrant in this area. The physical presence of shops, the 30, 40, 50-year presence of the name, the social interaction of people talking about their V75 bet on the weekend. Just many, many components are present that make that difficult.
All right, of course, you will be able to meet Bernard Marantelli at the 10th iGaming Forum at Bern Salonger in Stockholm on the 17th and 18th of April. We will take one final question in conjunction with this webinar. I just got in a question here saying, of course, Colossus Bets are positioning the brand in the US, but what realistic expectations does Bernard envisage will exist for the pools betting operator of the size and scale like Colossus? And does he expect to move quickly to establish a US operation? I have actually a follow-up question to this, but could you quickly try and answer the first question, Bernard, please?
Yeah, so I think his question is, what are Colossus Bets planning to do in North America? So look, if you look at North America today, there's only two bet types. There is horse racing betting and there is fantasy in real terms. Fantasy doesn't really lend itself to the features or technology Colossus dominate, such as cash out and syndicates. So what we are likely to be doing over the next 1 to 2 years in North America is going into joint ventures or going into business with the existing horse racing pools in North America to look at things like their pick fours and their pick sixes and modernizing those pools in conjunction with them to add cash out, to add syndicates. So for example, if you look at Woodbine, which is a Canadian racetrack and betting operator, the dominant race betting operator in Canada, they already take a cash out solution on their multi-leg bets with us, which is seeing their multi-leg turnover grow and their revenue from cash out on their multi-leg turnover grow. So we look to migrate that model to North America by adding jackpots and cash out and syndicates to the existing North American pools, such as TwinSpires, ExpressBet, TVG as ADWs, and United and Amtote as the dominant tote providers in North America. The other small element of North America that we will do as of July this year, we will be running the multi-leg products for the official British Racing Consortium, and we will be selling those products through international commingling into North America and other jurisdictions as well.
All right, I actually said that would be the last question, but we have unexpectedly many questions. We'll just take quickly a couple more.
I'm happy to do a few more, Robert. I've got enough time.
Okay, a question from Norway. We have heard about cash out possibilities, but what about new buy-in options? This is an industry professional from Norway asking, we have heard about cash out possibilities, but what about new buy-in options?
Yes. So look, I think the buy-in option is a very interesting prospect, and I have built some models which would allow a person to buy in at a predetermined price, or would be allowed to essentially run an exchange where they tried to be the person who bought into the ticket. I think to allow an industry professional or a retail player to buy in to a ticket that is in progress, is already in leg 2 or 3 or 4. It is interesting, but the information that would be available to that retail person or an industry professional to accurately price that ticket is complex, because in real terms, if you want to price that ticket perfectly, you need to have visibility of every ticket in the system, and that's not something that, let's say, an ATG or Colossus would generally want to publish. So to allow buy-in, you could essentially run an exchange where there was a bid and an offer, but in real terms, if I was to allow cash out to be open to the public, there would essentially be an arms race to buy those tickets through professionals or possibly retail. But I don't think retail are really in a position to buy a person who's 5 legs into a V75 that now has an existing value of 80,000 because he's 2 races from winning €1 million. A retail person doesn't have 80,000 to buy into that proposition. If one retail person wants 5 and 10 and another 505,000, then you're essentially going to have a consortium buy out or partially buy out that ticket. In real terms, it's easier to have a buyout offer made by the operator. If you want a buy-in option, you have to buy an existing ticket in the pool. So to make that happen, you essentially need to buy dummy tickets in the pool that you expect to sell to people who want to buy in, or you need to let people buy in the cash outs of somebody else. It's possible, but I think there are lots of complications, and I'm not sure that ultimately it's a true retail product.
All right, thank you very much for all your answers. This will be the very, very last question we're taking live during this webinar. Someone from England is asking a question that I actually wanted to ask myself. Bernard, CEO Colossus Bets, we notice you have B2B partners like Betfair, Ladbrokes, and Boyle Sports. What specific interests do you have in Sweden and the Nordic countries? Could you please try and answer this a bit quickly? I know you could talk about this for 10 minutes, certainly, but once again, I notice Colossus has B2B partners like Betfair, Ladbrokes, and Boyle Sports. What specific interests do you have in Sweden and the Nordic countries?
Yeah, so at the moment, really, we don't have any. We have a small arrangement with the Estonian tote, which is not quite Nordic, or not how they teach geography in Australia, where they sell our sports betting pools through the Estonian tote. But besides that, we're in B2B discussions with many of the Nordic operators. I think you'll see our first Nordic partner live in the next 2 or 3 months. We have contracted with one Nordic operator, and I think you'll see our sports betting pools go live with them in the next 2 or 3 months. So that obviously won't be Sweden, because we wouldn't be allowed to be live with them before January next year. But we ultimately would love to work with many of the Nordic operators, because it's a dominant pools area, and would be very glad to sell our sports and football pools in there, or help people with racing pools modernize them to have cash out and syndicates. And I appreciate that ATG already run a very successful syndicate type operation, slightly different to how we do them. But we would love to sell our sports pools, our racing pools into the Nordics, or we would love to help any of the Nordics merge liquidity with us or add technology to their pools.
And that was Mr. Bernard Marantelli, who you can meet in person on the 17th and 18th of April. The 18th of April is the full conference day at the 10th iGaming Forum at Berns Salonger in Stockholm, Sweden. Bernard, thank you very much, and hoping to meet you at our conference to discuss a little bit more about what's going on at this very exciting moment in time for Sweden and the Nordics.
Robert, thank you. And Robert, I assume you make this presentation available to the webinar people, or if not, they can email me and I'll forward it on.
Thank you for reminding me, Bernard. Of course, everyone that has attended this webinar will get the presentation as well as the slides. So if you missed anything, if you didn't get anything, then this will be sent to you by email. And I'm reminding everyone as well, everything about the event itself will be on igamingforum.com. So hoping to meet as many gaming interested people as possible in Berns at the 17th and 18th of April, as Sweden is voting for re-regulation this summer, and Sweden will have a re-regulated gambling and gaming market on the 1st of January 2019. Have a nice day, everyone, and thanks for joining.
Thank you.